When Judge Harold Whitman called Amara Fields into the courtroom, he considered her an easy target, an ordinary teacher who had dared to stand up to him. He wanted to ruin her career and boost his ego. But when he saw her standing there calmly with her notes in her hands, he didn't know that he was about to ruin his own career. Amara Fields adjusted the sleeves of her mustard-colored cardigan as she scrawled the words "Truth" and "Toni Morrison" across the whiteboard. Her 12th grade English students at Southlake High were half engaged, some taking notes, others watching the clock. It was her 8th year teaching there, a predominantly white school in a gentrified neighborhood of Atlanta, and though she was one of only 3 black educators on staff, she held her space with quiet authority. "Miss Fields," called a boy in the back row. "Why do we even need to read all this deeper meaning stuff? Can't a story just be a story?" Amara smiled without condescension, setting her marker down. "That's a fair question, Marcus. But literature isn't just stories. It's the soul of a time period. It's protest when no one will listen. It's power when you've been stripped of it. People like Morrison wrote not to entertain, but to testify." The bell rang. Backpack sipped. Chair scraped. On a nearby desk lay a folded copy of the Atlanta Gazette, headline bold and damning: "Judge Whitman's ruling slashes funding for inner-city schools." Amara picked it up, lips tightening. Her voice had trembled with restraint at last month's city council meeting when she spoke out against that very ruling. Judge Whitman had sat stone-faced through her comments, but his eyes, piercing, cold, assessing, had locked on her the entire time. Later, in the faculty lounge, her colleague Mr. Ortiz nudged her with a knowing glance. "Heard you gave the council an earful last week," he said, sipping lukewarm coffee. "I just told the truth," Amara replied. "Diverting education funds to a private golf resort isn't just unethical. It's violent. It starves our kids." "You made a powerful enemy," Ortiz warned. "Whitman's old money, old politics. That man doesn't lose, especially not to a black woman calling him out in public." "I'm not scared," she said, reaching for her coat. "Let him threaten me. I pay my taxes. I've got nothing to hide." But what Ortiz didn't know, what almost no one at Southlake knew, was that before Amara became a teacher, she had graduated at the top of her class from Howard Law. She'd never practiced, disillusioned by a justice system that seemed to require women like her to fight twice as hard for half the respect. Instead, she chose the classroom, a place where she could shape minds, teach resistance, and honor her mother's dream of education as liberation. That night, in her small Atlanta apartment with creaky hardwood floors and a bookshelf lined with Baldwin, bell hooks, and her mother's old legal textbooks, Amara curled up with student essays and jazz humming softly in the background. Her cat, Langston, napped on the couch. The blinking red light of her answering machine went unnoticed until she rose to pour herself tea. "Miss Fields," the voice said, formal and clipped. "This is the municipal court. You've been summoned to appear regarding your traffic citation from last month. Judge Whitman will be presiding. Please arrive Friday, 9 a.m. sharp." Amara frowned. A traffic ticket? She vaguely recalled rolling a stop sign weeks ago and had paid the fine online. There had been no hearing, no summons. She set her cup down. Something felt off. She pulled out her laptop, logged in, and checked her court payment receipt. Paid. Confirmed. Cleared. So why the summons? And then she remembered the way Whitman's eyes had followed her out of the council meeting, unblinking, as if memorizing her face. "This can't be real," she whispered. But it was. And it was only the beginning. Judge Harold Whitman's chambers were designed to intimidate, floor-to-ceiling walnut bookshelves, oil portraits of other stern-faced judges staring down from gilded frames, and a hand-carved mahogany desk that dwarfed even the confident men who stood before it. He sat behind that desk like a king, fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes scanning the slim folder labeled Amara Fields. "She teaches English at Southlake," his clerk, Patrick, said cautiously, standing a respectful distance from the desk. "No criminal record. Paid the citation. Lived in Atlanta for 15 years. Nothing remarkable." Judge Whitman's lips curled into something between amusement and contempt. "That's where you're wrong, Patrick. You see a quiet schoolteacher. I see a woman who embarrassed me. Publicly. Eloquent. Precise. Used language like a scalpel. Cited case law in front of the mayor's office like she had a JD. He leaned back. "Did you check her background?" Patrick nodded reluctantly. "She graduated from Howard Law. Top of her class. But she never passed the bar. Never even took it." "Interesting," Whitman muttered. "Knows just enough law to think she's clever, not enough to defend herself against me." He stood, walking slowly to the window, the Atlanta skyline glowing with late afternoon heat beyond the glass. Modify the record, he ordered. Change the charge from citation paid to failure to appear. Add a contempt notice. Nothing dramatic. Just enough heat to rattle her. Patrick hesitated. Sir, that's bending the procedure. The system bends, Whitman snapped, turning sharply. Especially for people like her. Outspoken. Idealistic. Dangerous. The room fell quiet. The message was clear. That evening, Amara sat on her couch grading essays when her phone buzzed. It was her principal, Dr. Fields, no relation, whose tone usually wavered between warm and awkward. But tonight, it was clipped. Amara, I received a call from the district office. There's concern about a legal matter involving you. A court summons and a contempt charge? They're asking questions about whether you've been using classroom time for political discussion. Amara stiffened. That's absurd. I teach literature. I don't campaign in class. I know, he said, lowering his voice. But this is coming from above. And you know how tight the budget's been. The judge still has sway with the school board. I tread carefully. She hung up, her heart pounding. Not from fear, from recognition. This was retaliation, calculated and precise. She pulled down a leather-bound journal from the bookshelf, her mother's legal notebook, full of handwritten notes from her days working on civil rights cases in Alabama. One phrase was underlined in fading blue ink. Power doesn't show its teeth until it feels threatened. Amara opened her laptop and began searching. Judge Harold Whitman plus ethics complaints. Article after article surfaced, rulings favoring wealthy developers, sudden dismissal of housing discrimination cases, and an eerie pattern. Citizens who opposed him in public often found themselves entangled in legal issues shortly after. One case stood out. A community organizer cited for disorderly conduct days after a speech criticizing Whitman's zoning decision. Another, a local journalist, was investigated for tax irregularities after publishing a piece on the judge's family's real estate holdings. None of the cases stuck, but none of the victims fought back either. Amara's phone rang. It was Patrice, her colleague and close friend at Southlake. Girl, what is going on? Stevens just told me central office might start observing your classes. Said something about curriculum compliance and public conduct. They're circling, Amara murmured, her voice low and calm. Whitman's making his move. Patrice paused. You okay? Amara looked at her mother's notebook again. I'm done being quiet. That night, she pulled a plastic storage bin from under her bed. Inside were legal textbooks, old case files, annotated court rulings from her law school years. She opened one titled Judicial Misconduct and Procedural Abuse, flipping quickly to a chapter on contempt misuse. As the city outside her window settled into a humid night, Amara Fields sat cross-legged on her rug, building a defense not just for herself, but for everyone who'd been silenced before her. The storm had arrived, and this time it would have a witness. The next morning, Amara arrived at Southlake High just before the bell. Her walk down the hallway felt different. Eyes lingered longer, whispers came quicker, and even the usually boisterous Coach Danvers offered only a quiet nod. Word had spread. She was no longer just the literature teacher. She was now the center of a quiet, nervous storm. Principal Stevens greeted her outside her classroom with a strained smile and a clipboard. District wants an observation today, he said quickly. Just routine. Nothing to worry about. Amara met his eyes. Because of Judge Whitman? Stevens flinched. Look, Amara, I've always respected your teaching, but I have a district to answer to and pressures coming from places I can't control. She didn't reply. She simply opened her classroom door and let him follow her in. That day, she taught Invisible Man. She read aloud, voice steady and deliberate, as the students leaned in. I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Stevens took notes. Amara didn't look at him once. That evening, back in her apartment, Amara organized the contents of her grandfather's old briefcase, which she'd inherited after her mother passed, and slipped inside every document she'd printed. Court payment receipt. Traffic citation with no appearance requirement. Emails to the court clerk. A log of the call with the court office. Public records showing Whitman's ruling history. Names of those previously targeted. But something still bothered her, the silence around Whitman. How had no one challenged him before? Why hadn't a single complaint ever reached disciplinary review? She picked up her phone and called someone she hadn't spoken to in years. Keisha Allen, a voice answered. State Bar Association. Keisha. It's Amara Fields. A pause. Then a delighted, girl, it's been a decade. Where have you been hiding? Southlake High, Amara replied. I need a favor. By the end of that call, she had more than a favor. She had access to records of complaints dismissed on technicalities, of disciplinary files never opened due to insufficient documentation, names, dates, patterns. Her next call was to Malik Henderson, once her star student, now an investigative journalist for the Georgia Monitor. He remembered her voice instantly. You still grading with that red pen, Miss Fields? He laughed. No, Malik. I'm grading judges now. And I think I just found one with answers worth printing. As the calls ended, Amara sat in the glow of her laptop, breathing slow, fingers tapping the leather handle of the briefcase. This wasn't about a traffic ticket anymore. It wasn't even about Whitman's ego. This was about a system that had allowed men like him to bully quietly for years, and about how, when faced with a woman like her, they panicked. The next day, she formally requested transcripts of Whitman's previous contempt hearings. The court clerk, the same one who had seemed impatient on the phone, now looked visibly unsettled as she handed over the thick file. This isn't common, the clerk said quietly. People don't usually ask for these. I'm not most people, Amara answered. Back at home, she read every case, line by line, rulings, language, tone. She circled every one that targeted a vocal community member. 7 cases, same judge, same pattern, and not one, not a single one, had been appealed. Until now. That night, Amara picked out her courtroom outfit, a tailored black blouse, modest slacks, and her mother's earrings, tiny gold scales of justice, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. She placed them on the nightstand beside her briefcase and her notebook. She wasn't stepping into that courtroom as a teacher. She was stepping in as a witness, a strategist, a daughter of 2 generations who'd been taught that silence was never safety and that the law didn't belong to the powerful. It belonged to those brave enough to demand it. The courthouse was already alive when Amara stepped through its doors, briefcase in hand and shoulders squared. Security guards glanced at her with vague curiosity, perhaps wondering why a woman so composed, so unreadable, would arrive alone, unaccompanied by legal counsel. But Amara Fields didn't need anyone to stand beside her. Not today. She took a seat at the back of courtroom 3B and watched as Judge Whitman moved through his docket like a man checking boxes, rapid, impatient, disinterested in nuance. He hardly glanced at defendants, dismissed explanations mid-sentence, and issued contempt citations as if tossing crumbs. She watched him closely, not with fear, but with calculation. Docket 59A, Amara Fields. Failure to appear in contempt of court. Her name rang across the room. She rose slowly, walked to the defendant's table, and placed her briefcase on the polished wood. Her fingers didn't tremble. Her breathing didn't falter. Judge Whitman looked up, feigning indifference. Miss Fields, he said, voice clipped. You've been charged with failing to appear for your scheduled traffic hearing and for contempt due to that failure. How do you plead? Not guilty, Your Honor, she answered clearly. And I request the opportunity to clarify some serious procedural errors. The judge leaned back in his chair. Proceed. Amara opened her folder with deliberate calm. The citation I received on September 2nd contains no appearance requirement. I paid the associated fine on September 4th through the city's online portal. Here's the payment confirmation, timestamped and verified. She handed the document to the clerk, who passed it forward. Whitman gave it a passing glance. Payment does not exempt you from appearing in court, Miss Fields. With respect, it does when no appearance is requested, she replied, lifting another sheet. This is the original citation. As you'll see, there's no listed date, and the online portal showed the matter as resolved once payment was received. Whitman's eyes narrowed. Let's not play amateur attorney here. The court records indicate you were required to appear. I'd be happy to review that record, she said calmly. Specifically, the proof of notification you claim was sent to me. A long pause. The courtroom grew still. Whitman signaled to the clerk, who began digging through a folder, his hands unusually clumsy. After several moments, he produced a generic notification form, unsigned, undated, with no certified mail record attached. Amara studied it silently, then placed it flat on the table. Your Honor, under Municipal Court Rule 7.3, a contempt charge based on failure to appear requires documented proof of service, either by certified mail or physical delivery. This form lacks both. Whitman's jaw clenched. The gallery began to stir. You're suggesting court personnel failed to follow protocol? He snapped. I'm suggesting that this case has not met the legal threshold for contempt, she answered. and that your courtroom procedures, at least in this instance, may be inconsistent with both municipal and ethical guidelines. His voice rose. Miss Fields, your attitude borders on disrespect. You've already demonstrated a pattern of defiance. Your remarks at the council meeting last month, for example. Amara's spine straightened. There it was. The connection. Spoken aloud. A public admission of bias. Are you saying my constitutionally protected comments at a civic meeting are grounds for judicial punishment? She asked, her tone razor-sharp. Gasps echoed softly from the benches behind her. Even the stenographer paused for a fraction of a second. Whitman flushed, pale to red in one breath. This court will not be undermined by theatrics. This isn't theater, she said, eyes locked on him. This is my life, my job, my reputation, and I will not be punished for speaking the truth in a public forum. Whitman slammed his gavel. Enough. I am finding you in contempt. $2,000 in fines and 40 hours of community service. You may consider this matter concluded. No, Your Honor, Amara said quietly. I am filing a motion for judicial recusal under State Conduct Rule 2.11. The room fell silent. Even Whitman stopped moving. You will what? He asked. She reached into her briefcase. A judge must recuse himself when impartiality can reasonably be questioned. And I have every reason and documentation to question yours. Judge Whitman's mouth had gone dry. For the first time in years, he wasn't in control of his courtroom. Across from him stood a woman he had labeled as insignificant, now speaking statutes, citing ethics codes, wielding language like a weapon. And worse, she was calm, poised, as if she prepared for this very moment her entire life. On what grounds are you moving for recusal? He asked, his voice brittle. Amara didn't flinch. She opened a new folder, removed 3 neatly paperclip documents, and held them up for the clerk to retrieve. First, she began, addressing the gallery just as much as the bench. Your Honor connected these proceedings to my comments at a public council meeting. That alone creates an appearance of retaliatory motive, which violates the standards of judicial neutrality. Whitman's face twitched. He didn't interrupt. Second, she continued, there are procedural inconsistencies. My citation was processed as paid and closed on September 4th. The status was changed to appearance required on September 7th, 3 days after I criticized your ruling publicly, without any notice to me. I've submitted a request for metadata from the online system, and that request is now part of the public record. Several lawyers seated along the wall leaned forward. The reporter in the back was scribbling furiously. The gallery was no longer merely watching. They were witnessing something they would talk about for years. And third, Amara said, her voice unwavering, I've compiled a list of 7 other citizens who experienced similar procedural escalations after publicly challenging Your Honor's decisions. I've spoken to 3 of them personally. All of them faced contempt charges. None had prior records. None had legal counsel. And all walked away in silence. You're reaching, Whitman said, though the conviction in his tone was starting to crack. This is conspiracy and slander. This is a pattern, Amara corrected him. And when a judge uses the courtroom as a tool for personal retribution, it becomes not just unethical, it becomes unlawful. The gavel was in his hand, but he didn't strike it. I will not tolerate baseless accusations in my courtroom. That's why I've brought evidence, she said. And if the motion for recusal is denied, I'm prepared to file an immediate interlocutory appeal under the collateral order doctrine. I have precedent to support that motion, Thompson v. Fair County Court, 2011. The courtroom was dead quiet. Even the air felt still. Whitman shifted, then turned to his clerk. We'll recess for 15 minutes. He stood abruptly and exited through the door behind the bench. As the door closed, voices in the room exploded into whispers. People leaned in toward each other, murmuring her name like it suddenly meant something. Amara stood motionless, eyes on the bench, her heart pounding not from fear, but from focus. She had prepared for battle. She had carried the truth into a courtroom that rarely welcomed it. And now, the man who thought he could silence her had finally been forced into retreat. 15 minutes later, Judge Whitman returned, his face paler, his jaw clenched tighter. This court finds that in the interest of avoiding the appearance of impropriety, he began, as not meeting hers, I will recuse myself from this matter and all future matters involving the defendant. All charges are dismissed with prejudice. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just the sound of a man swallowing his pride as the system quietly corrected itself, or at least pretended to. Amara didn't smile. She simply nodded. Outside the courthouse, the reporter approached her with a microphone. Miss Fields, would you like to comment? Amara looked past the lens, toward the people gathering near the steps, some former students, some strangers. I didn't come here to win, she said. I came here to remind them, the law isn't a weapon. It's a responsibility. If you enjoyed this story about justice, click the like button and subscribe to hear more inspiring stories that remind us what really matters in life. And tell us, which country are you watching from? We'd love to know.